How do you, can I get the pronunciation of the full name real quick?
Rod Ibrahimi.
Ibrahimi. Okay. I was like, I'm going to butcher Ibrahimi if you don't tell me.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Stablecoin House. I'm joined by Rod Ibrahimi from Mesh, and we're going to dive into the merchant acceptance of stablecoins, and we're going to dive into connectivity and all sorts of fun and exciting topics over the next half an hour. Rod, thanks for taking the time to sit down.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us in your private villa.
Absolutely. It's not a bad place. We have the seaside, the pool. It's not a bad place to talk stablecoins.
People were in the pool today. So
people were in the pool today. I'm glad to see that at least someone's using it.
Exactly.
I'm curious, maybe you can give a quick overview of Mesh in like 1 or 2 minutes so we can kind of set the context. And then we can dive deeper into some of the questions that I've had about what you see in stablecoins and how you guys are thinking about the market.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Mesh, we're building the world's first crypto payment network. And the focus is on both the first mile and the last mile. And on the first mile side, we have connectivity into exchanges and wallets, over 300 different integrations. Yep. So that's kind of like reducing the friction on that first mile. And then on the last mile, we're also global and settling end to end. So that's kind of our crypto payment network.
Got it. So when we think about like merchant adoption of stablecoins, you guys did some really cool stuff with Shift 4 recently,
Yep.
Right? That kind of allowed stablecoins to be used with Shift 4's POS systems and things of that nature. I'm curious kind of what the uptake has been around that and kind of what the key driver was and kind of some of the merchants that are looking at this. What pain point are they trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few things. So obviously, like we always hear, stablecoins international is like
exactly.
A key, resonates really well with stablecoins. But on the merchant side, Shift 4 is a cash-like transaction. So there's a lot of cash-like, people are using cash.
Interesting.
And the merchants also prefer that for refunds or chargebacks or other things that might happen as part of that transaction. And so that's where, one of the many things that they see benefits, immediate benefits.
So it's the transaction finality, the ability to not charge back and reverse and things like that. Once a stablecoin payment is done,
that's one of the many benefits. But also, I think their audience is also more crypto native. And so that's also, something that they've been wanting to offer for a long time.
Do you think, louder.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
For the consumers that are making these transactions, are they kind of stablecoin native type consumers that are looking for an outlet to spend their stables, or are they more everyday consumers that are exposed to stables kind of in the back end?
Yeah, I think most of them are crypto native.
Okay.
In that particular use case.
Well, this is an interesting conversation because this is kind of the flip side of a lot of what we've been talking about, right? There's a lot of arguments that have been made about stablecoins being back-end infrastructure, right? When we talk about B2B kind of treasury management and things of that nature, it's very much stablecoins as a back-end, abstracted away from everybody else. This product is the inverse of that, where you're giving crypto-native people the ability to actually spend stablecoins in a for stablecoins, disclosed it's a stablecoin utility way. Where do you think that market goes? I'm curious. Do you think that there's a lot more volumes that will happen around kind of stablecoins as a back-end process, or do you think that we need more mass market retail interfaces for stablecoins?
Yeah, I think it's both. It's both for sure. So like on the first mile, as I like to call it, the way we kind of think about it is that you might have a whole ton of assets, right? Different kinds of you might have BTC, ETH. You don't really care if the merchant wants USDC or Pi USD. So on that first mile, Mesh as an example, but there's other ways to do this. Mesh as an example, we'll do all the conversions and swaps. And so you don't need to go to your Coinbase or your MetaMask and get the token that merchant wants, right? So Shift, Blade wants to be settled in. So we can handle that first mile seamlessly. And then on that last mile, we do a similar thing where we can pay out Blade in your example, in whatever stable that they want. So to answer your question, I think we're going to push this down so that it's invisible. I mean, I think that it's already happening, but it's going to be invisible to the merchant even in some cases and to the consumer.
Especially if it then becomes even a fiat settlement, right? Then the consumer should be able to pay in whatever asset they have, whether it's a stable, whether it's BTC, ETH, Sol. Some people love having taxable events on cups of coffee.
Sure.
Why not? Right. And then eventually the merchant just gets whatever asset they want, right? Why does the merchant care what asset the user spends? Why does the user care what asset the merchant spends? Kind of the interop here, I think, is what's really interesting. And I think that's also on thesis for a lot of other players who kind of see the concept of making the different assets interoperable across chains, across tokens. Right. You guys are just taking that, instead of an infrastructure product, much more interestingly, directly to the merchants and the consumers through Shift4 and through your other customers versus just being a DeFi bridge or something like that living in the back end.
Yep, that's right.
Very interesting.
Yep.
Where do you kind of see the future of mesh over the next 2 to 3 years? Where are you guys investing very heavily? And I don't want to say this bull market is done. I don't think it's done by any means. Sure. Right? But we're very much in a very frothy market. We're kind of in the middle of a hype cycle. I would argue that this market doesn't last for much longer. If we're not at peak hype, we're probably close to peak hype. Yep. What do you think that next cycle, 2 or 3 years from now, what do you build for the future?
Yeah, I think the international corridors is like something that I think you guys have talked a lot about here. Yep. That we're expanding into quite rapidly. So like merchants that merchants and PSPs that are abroad that want to enable stablecoin payments. Like that's an area of growth that we're focused on, and then also building in compliance and other kind of functionality into our platform, so that the merchants don't have to think about that. So it's kind of like KYC to KYB, like end to end. So that's also stuff that we're building into Mesh as well.
Very cool. What are the other pieces of the stack that you see a lot of demand for? Right? Is it PSPs also need help around accounting? Do they need help around compliance when they come to Mesh and say, hey, we want to start to do this? Not even stablecoin native, but just kind of token native acceptance, right? Let's include kind of other crypto assets as well. You guys crush it on the connectivity side, obviously. What are kind of the other pieces that they need help with?
Yeah, everything. They need help with everything. I mean, I think, some of the other, talks you've had already, like I think on the accounting side, they need help with understanding the tax implications and, like the custody issues, and I think we actually do a lot of education even with the PSPs and the merchant side, and that I think is a big part of what we have to do. So like on our go-to-market, it's about educating, and that's like constant. So I think full stack.
We've talked a lot about Shift4, and probably for good reason. Shift4 is a huge deal, right? They're well known. They're one of the largest PSPs that do a lot of this merchant processing. But outside of kind of Shift4, Mesh has a lot of other very interesting use cases and other interesting clients. Not necessarily the most popular or the highest volume, but maybe the most surprising use case that you wouldn't have expected going into this business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think these, I shared a little bit earlier, but like these restricted businesses and the card networks that have they have restricted businesses, right? So like there's some things that card networks don't process, right? Transactions that they don't process. This is a very surprising, but shouldn't be surprising.
Shouldn't be surprising.
Like use case that we're kind of like looking at very closely because they're regulated, they're legal, but they're restricted in TradFi, right? For various reasons. And so like, can you unlock that in the right ways? And so like that's one thing.
Interesting. Bensi from Utila was talking about how when they started selling into the PSP market, it was really focused around iGaming and some of these other high-risk verticals because there's a very natural fit for stablecoins and those sorts of transactions.
That's right.
Are those the sorts of markets that you see a lot of demand from as well, or is it kind of in other areas?
For sure. No, those 100%. Yeah.
How do you think that then transitions into more traditional markets, right? Because typically, even in a lot of, like if you think about card acquiring, there's so many gateways, checkout providers, things like that, that I think a very typical playbook in payments is you start by servicing high-risk merchants. And then as you grow as a company, you slowly offboard your higher-risk merchants as you get more traditional or lower-risk merchants. And you, over time, over a period of 5 to 7 years, you change your volume mix from mostly high-risk to mostly normal, and then you try to IPO or exit or something with the mostly normal flow. And I think for high-risk merchants, that puts them in an interesting position where they're constantly having to switch providers because they get onboarded somewhere for 2 years, and then once that company's big enough, they say, no, sorry, we're offboarding this particular vertical and becoming a traditional player now. Do you think that happens also in the stablecoin world, or is the stablecoin world just generally more accepting?
I think that's gonna change. So like I think the customer rebalancing is like
it's a very polite way of putting it. Customer rebalancing.
Yeah, I mean we're not seeing that like sense or urgency for that kind of like I think on the merchant side, like they are sensitive to this, but I think that they see something in stable coins that's like enduring, that's gonna like basically meet TradFi where TradFi has the gaps. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So like we're kind of like building this bridge. TradFi has some gaps. We're going to cover those gaps, and I don't think that we're going to see that kind of behavior, at least in my view.
Interesting. Where do
what
you
think?
see? I think on the liquidity side, unfortunately, we'll see a lot of that.
Okay.
I think on the on-chain world, it's very, very easy to be much, much more accepting of all sorts of different merchants. I think where it gets tricky is when you're then going back into like traditional fiat rails on the settlement side.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of orchestrators, off-ramp providers, people like that, who are following the traditional payments playbook, meaning they're going after iGaming, they're going after adults, they're going after these high-risk type industries as a way to just get volumes flowing through their on-ramp and their off-ramp.
Yeah.
And as they get those volumes and are then able to land more traditional companies, then they're starting to offboard or rebalance their customers, as you so elegantly put it. Which is probably a great argument for a lot of these higher risk merchants to do as much on-chain as possible, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
And to avoid the rebalancing into the fiat bank accounts and all those different things. And if they can live in an on-chain treasury world, then they don't have their issues.
That's where I think that, there's a huge gap that I think we can solve for. So.
But if they need to go back into their bank accounts, now again, you're back into the traditional limitations of the traditional banking systems and the risk profiles of what the off-ramp providers will do, which as soon as they become large, starts to mirror what a traditional bank would do, which again is kind of exclusive of a lot of these merchants.
That's right, yeah.
Do you see any market opportunities or gaps for helping merchants with treasury management, right? So they start to accept tokens on chain. They want to get settled in stables. There's a ton of great wallet providers out there, right? We have Bensy from Utilon, there's the folks at Defense, Fireblocks, et cetera. There's people that are building really, really great wallet infrastructure. Do you think that eventually becomes part of the mesh platform with like treasury products to help you earn yield and to manage those sorts of things? Or is that something that you see as external and you're really just focused on being the best in the world at the connectivity piece?
Yeah, we've thought a lot about this, and I think the more and more demand we hear from the merchant side of the things that they need in that stack, we will be thinking about building that stuff out. So it's on our radar. I think it's not a shorter term thing, but absolutely.
Because to me, that seems like a very natural next
100%,
step, right? Step one is how do you get these people transacting and accepting stables? And I think you guys are by and far the leader of that space now, right? When you think about stablecoin-based payments into merchants, you think mesh. From a brand perspective, from a product perspective, mesh is everywhere at all the events. We've enjoyed doing some fun events together. You guys are kind of that apex predator right now in that space. And for me, then I wonder, okay, great, I'm a merchant. I'm accepting stablecoins or crypto. Now all of a sudden I have a stablecoin balance. What's next? Well, either I need to convert that into my treasury program, which means off-ramping it into fiat and putting it in, wherever my corporate cash management program is, or I need to be able to replicate my cash management program on-chain. And if the world is trending towards an on-chain future, I feel like there's a big opportunity to play in creating those yield and treasury vehicles for these merchants and creating a more kind of broader platform play.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So we're going to have to be, there when the merchants need us. And actually, they're coming to us with those needs. Like, hey, how do I, once I get paid out and settled in stables, what am I going to do?
What's next? That makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to tease out the alpha here for everybody. What do you think sets Mesh apart from everybody else in the world?
Well, historically, it's been that connectivity, so that 300 plus, wallets and exchanges that we can connect to on that first mile. But I think increasingly, it's like that end-to-end flow, settling, with the merchants and doing it full life cycle. So I think that's still our, kind of like bread and butter is that first mile, but increasingly, it's both the first and last mile.
Do you see merchants or customers in general, maybe just not even merchants, let's just define customers very broadly. Do you see them coming more for, hey, we're building our own stablecoin stack and we need mesh for a piece of the stack? Or do you see them more coming as, hey, we want to do stable coins. We don't even know what the pieces of the stack should be.
Yeah,
we want mesh to do as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's the latter, which I think is the opportunity for all of us, right? It's like, there's
it's that broad platform with a lot of integrations to act as that command center or the hub.
Or just that there's education required, right? And I think that's, for all of us, it's like, how do we educate merchants and others, PSPs, like how this all works and how it comes together. So I think there's a lot we can do better. So I think you guys are doing a pretty good job.
Thank you. I'd like to think so. I'm very biased though, so it's hard to think otherwise. I'm curious, are there any questions around stablecoin acceptance from anybody here?
We have some from the audience.
Oh yes, let's take. Now we're on a game show. Questions from the audience.
Was that you, Ronnie? Sorry.
What role do regulatory frameworks play in accelerating or hindering stablecoin adoption in major economies?
I'll just repeat it real quick. What role does regulatory adoption play in stablecoin acceptance in major economies? What was the Twitter handle for that one? Or the X handle? Sorry, don't cancel me. Lisa Bonita. Thank you, Lisa Bonita.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical, right? I mean, I think you guys talked yesterday, Amia and at Flourish, about how the central banks are trying to figure out ways to handle stablecoin inflows. And so I think that this is a very unique, opportunity I hadn't thought about, right? So like if there's no regulatory framework in Africa, for example, in that corridor, how are the central banks, going to handle that? So if there's a huge influx of stables, they want to handle fiat on their books. How do we reconcile that? So like we have to do things like the Genius Act that we're doing in the US, in other places. And, I think that's going to be a big, it's a requirement.
Maybe following up on that question, what countries do you see the most volumes in? Is it kind of established markets like the US, or are you seeing more emerging markets?
Yeah, so we're seeing APAC is like a huge growth driver for us.
Interesting.
Primarily. And it's partly because we don't have enough connectivity in Africa, for example, but like in some other areas, but like we're building that out. But yeah, APAC is big, and obviously the US.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Where in APAC?
All over APAC. So yeah, I mean, everywhere. Yep. Yeah, everywhere.
Would you maybe a question for both of you?
Sure.
And obviously we got Utilidad before. Just like to understand a bit more about the value chain and like who is kind of how do you stack this company together? Like you're focusing on merchant acceptance. Utilidad was
wallets.
A wallet.
Yep.
And that's how
on and off ramps.
Okay. So that's how.
Yeah, it all comes together.
I think you just described the value chain actually in your question.
You did a good job, yeah. And there's a bunch of other pieces in between as well. But yes, basically
you
that's
guys are leaders in this space. That's why you're here talking to us.
Exactly.
We'd like to think that, yes.
No. I think in general, kind of for merchant payments, there is an accounting piece.
Sure.
There is a compliance piece. And then outside of that, it's as a merchant, how do I actually receive these stablecoin transactions, right, in a way that's a little bit more sophisticated than here's a QR code, please scan it, and hopefully it goes to the right place, hopefully it's the right amount. Like Mesh takes care of all of those problems and makes the acceptance piece really simple. Then the question is, where do the stablecoins go? And the answer could be Utila, the answer could be something embedded into the Mesh platform from a wallet standpoint, because now you have to custody these assets that you've just accepted for payments. And then if you want to stay on chain, fantastic. If you want to go off chain, then that's where Borderless plays in. And our whole thesis is on creating the seamless interoperability of on-chain and off-chain money globally.
Well, more
you got
questions.
Another audience. I love these audience. This is the first conversation we had audience questions. I'm excited. You're popular, Rod.
This is from Wally Deepins.
Wally Deepins.
How are businesses integrating stablecoins into their payment systems to reduce transaction costs?
So the question is, how are businesses putting stablecoins into their transactions to reduce costs?
Yeah, why don't you go first?
Obviously Visa, MasterCard, card acceptance is a notoriously expensive payment rail, right? Of 2-3+%, depending on the amount of volume that you do, your MCC codes, the industries you're in, things of that nature. Now, I think one thing that is interesting that I'd love to also get your perspective on is a lot of that cost that's borne by the merchant isn't going to the processors and the card rails. It's actually going back to the consumer. right? And especially in the US, we're spoiled and trained on Amex lounges, credit card points, cashback rewards, all these sorts of things.
Chargebacks, refunds, those all built into the network,
Which, from a merchant standpoint, the costs are ridiculous, 2-3%. But from a consumer standpoint, I get access to credit, which means I get to spend money I don't have that I can't do with stablecoins. I get miles or cash back, which I don't get on stablecoins. So how much consumer retraining needs to happen for stablecoins to supplant cards as kind of the default payment mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate question. And I still think that there's going to be like card payments, and we can start solving that with bits and pieces of this, stablecoin story, but we're not quite there yet. But yeah, there's also cash-like payments, which is what, I think stablecoins do a really good job today of solving for. And I guess to answer that question, to add to your answer, FX risk is also something that's like reducing the cost. So like when you're doing any kind of cross-border transaction, stablecoins, the obvious no-brainer thing is that you're going to a volatile currency, and you're reducing that volatility and the FX risk. So yeah.
Like let's pretend that you're doing a USDC transaction and you're in the US, right? Your 200 to 300 basis points cost goes to, including an off-ramp transaction, like fully settled to your bank account, goes to what, 10 basis points or so? It's like that's a massive reduction in cost all around. But the consumer needs to have stablecoins, needs to understand how to spend them. And I think that right now is
you gave me a good example before we started talking of like people getting paid in the Mideast or in Dubai, for example, and transferring to Philippines, like a very specific example. I don't know, maybe you could share.
My kind of personal belief is that where we're going to see a lot of stablecoin merchant payments is in emerging markets where stablecoin adoption kind of from this dollarization narrative is high, right? It's like, I think, and this is my personal bias, I think like in the US, the stablecoin merchant payments use case is not super interesting. I'm happy to debate that. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But I personally don't see a ton of value there. Where I see a lot of value is in countries like Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, Philippines, etc., where you have a lot of freelancer, kind of gig economy folks, etc., that are now starting to go to stablecoin-based payroll platforms like the Rises and others of the world. Even Deal's now doing stablecoin payouts, right? They're one of the biggest contractor payments platforms in the world. And that's where people are holding their balances in stablecoins because they want to hold dollars, and stablecoins is the best proxy. And therefore, they need to have a wallet because they need to be able to ingest stablecoins in, which solves that UX friction of why would I ever sign up for a wallet. And they need to already know how to transact from a wallet, how to log in, how to link it, how to do things of that nature. And to me, in those markets is where it makes all the sense in the world for these merchants to say, hey, you already have stablecoins. They're sitting in a fintech app. They're sitting in a neobank. They're sitting in some of these things, right? Benzi said the future of stablecoins is your JP Morgan Chase account, right? Let's take that one step further. There's so many neobanks that are taking 5, 10, 15+% market share of the banking market. If I'm sitting in Brazil and I have stablecoins sitting in my neobank account as USD, I want to just spend that directly without converting it to BRL, then back to the merchant, having more FX fees, having all those sorts of things. That's personally where I think the adoption is interesting. Curious to get your take.
No, I agree. Yeah. I don't know if we answered her question though, or this last question. Was there any other ones? Or anyone here, I guess? It's the end of the day talk.
It's the end of the day talk.
Have you seen an increase in the volume from success in DeFi lately? It seems that the volume on chain almost matched now the volume of banners and pages. Have you noticed in the mesh this?
Well, that's a great question.
Between basically volume flowing into on-chain trading or DeFi.
We're actually looking at this. We have like a little project in-house, and so like it's a hard problem to like identify or like analyze. But we're trying, like we should publish our results.
You really should. I would love to see it at least, and I think the rest of the world would too.
Maybe I'll get your info and we can, I'll publish it more broadly too. But I think right now it's unclear, but we're looking at this specifically and to see this.
Also what they are doing on-chain?
Yeah, that's hard. That's even harder to do. Yeah, that's even harder to do. But yes, yeah, this first part we are looking at really closely. So
I assume a lot of the messaging and connectivity is encrypted to where Mesh itself can't even look at transactions, right? So it's a little bit more complicated of an analytics problem to try to piece the pieces together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I think is what we all want from a privacy standpoint.
That's what we wanted.
Right?
Yeah, that's what we want.
I don't know the answer is actually a great answer from a privacy standpoint.
Yeah.
Very cool. Maybe we'll take one final question if anybody has it, and call it a day. Maybe I have a final question. For people who are, for merchants and PSPs that are sitting right now and having discussions in their boardrooms about starting to accept stablecoins and digital assets as part of their merchant payments, whether they're hotel chains or these traditional companies that are not very technology forward, what do you think is the biggest key points that if they're watching the live stream, you would drive home to them that they could take to their boardrooms into these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one is like ask these questions that maybe you think are the dumb questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do we do when we accept stables? Like, what happens next? How do we off-ramp it? Like all these things that I think, at least when I'm in some of these meetings, like they're not asking, and we have to ask for them, right? And so, like, I think that maybe they feel uncomfortable asking those questions. I mean, we're happy to answer those questions for them. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard to do your own research right now in this space. And so like, engaging with folks in the space, I think is the best way, and not being afraid to ask those questions.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks for the time.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Thank you.